Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's extraordinary virtual meeting of the Wormwood Scrubs Charitable Trust. My name is Councillor Sanderson, and I chair the committee. First of all, could I remind all participants of a few housekeeping points? Please keep your microphones muted unless you are speaking. Please wait until I call on you before speaking, and you can let me know that you would like to speak either by using on the raise hand button in the buttons down at the bottom of the screen, or just by physically raising your hands. And can everybody introduce themselves when they first address the committee? Okay, item 1, apologies for absence. No apologies for absence were received. Item 2, declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest? No. Doesn't look like it, lovely. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. The members approved the minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of June 2021. Miriam?
Hi, I'm Miriam Shea, Friends of the Scrubs, co-opted non-voting member of the Wormwood Scrubs Charitable Trust. I just had 3 small corrections on the minutes, which were on page 9, the last paragraph. It says, Carmen explained this budget was set fairly cautiously and it didn't factor in any additional costs for weekend parking. I think that should be any additional income for weekend parking. And then on page 10, the second paragraph, starting, the chair noted that HS2, etc., etc. Line 4 of that paragraph, their works would not be completed before the 23rd of February 2020. I think that's meant to be February 2022. And then lastly, also on that page in the matters resolved, point 4, approved access across WSCT land for the Met Police as part of policing arrangements for the Notting Hill Carnival. That didn't actually happen because the carnival was cancelled, so I think that can just be removed.
Yeah, agreed on that.
That was it.
Thank you, Miriam. Lovely. Anything else on the minute before we move on? Stephen?
Stephen Whaley-Cohen, Chair of the Friends of Wormwood Scrubs and co-opted non-voting member of this committee. Just to say that, yes, I approved the minutes as now amended, but I hope we'll get them again at our next meeting so that we can deal with any matters arising, rather than doing it now, because this is a meeting about HS2.
And Rita, is that all right to do that? So the next meeting, any matters arising, we'll take into consideration then, given it's a month away.
Yes, that's fine.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so if the minutes are approved with the matters arising pending until the next meeting, can we go to item 4, the manager's report, which is a report on HS2's intention to compulsorily purchase the Stamford Brook Sewer and UTX compound sites to complete their work. And could I ask Steve Hollingworth to introduce this item, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So you just read out that the heading, HS2 has powers under the Act to CPO, compulsory purchase order, the land or parcels of land outlined in the heading, i.e. the Stamford Brook Sewer site and the UTX compound site. And this was confirmed, I believe, at a public meeting last Monday on the 26th of July as well. HS2 need to own the land to grant rights to utilities providers to carry out the works and provide the easement agreements. The land is shown in Appendix 1 of the report, which is the 2 parcels, which I think most people are familiar with. In terms of background, HS2 rights under the Act expire next year in February 2022, and therefore to avoid delays to the HS2 works, they wish to CPO the land before the powers run out. HS2 are currently negotiating with various utilities to facilitate the diversion works. However, they believe and are concerned that the agreements will not be in place before the Act expires. Not being able to complete these as landowner risks delays and the delivery of the new station. So what agreements do they need? So for the Sanford Brook sewer site, the main strip of land to the north by the north of the Scrubs, there's only one utility company, which is Thames Water, and it also runs under Network Rail land as well. So there's a slight complication there, but there's only one. And although there's only one agreement, HS Steel are still concerned that this might not be in place before February 2022. The UTX site is more complicated because there's 13 separate companies to deal with. And in addition, they need to build the pipe first before they can actually put these utilities and company assets through it. And that won't happen until 2023. So therefore, they're very concerned here that they will not be able to get these agreements in place before February 2022. It's also understood that following that work and the redirecting of these utilities, they're then going to move 6 back out into the road in 2028-29. So they've got 2 options under compulsory purchasing. There's 2 processes available to them. The main difference is the date on which ownership of the land transfers. So the first one, and perhaps the most straightforward, is called a General Vesting Declaration, a GVD. And this is the cleanest for HS2. The land included in the notice would simply vest automatically on a specified date. This is the preferred route of HS2 and has been used in other London boroughs. HS2 have indicated that this was have indicated they want to use this for the UTX land area. And compensation is assessed on the vesting date and is normally at market rate. Well, it is at market rate. The second process is called a notice to treat, followed by a notice of entry. And under this route, HS2 would inform the council or the trust of their intention to acquire the land. And this would then be a second stage where HS2 would give notice of entry, which could be up to 3 years later after giving the initial first notice. And ownership would only transfer after the notice of entry and that the compensation has been agreed, i.e. the value of the land. So council officers have been lobbying HS2 to use the second process so the land is not actually transferred. And I believe at a public meeting on the 26th of July, HS2 advised that they would use the process of notice to treat for the Stranford Brewer site, but I believe they still want to use the GVD for the UTX site because of those added complications. So that's the report, Chair. Attached to the report are question and answers, or answers to questions provided by members of the public and from the Friends. And I'm happy to go through those as well if you want me to, or are there any specific ones people would like to raise?
Thank you, Steve. Is it helpful if I put the maps up first before we go to the questions so people can see?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, thank you.
Fine. Let me just there those. And do you have a preference? There's HS2 land parcels version 2 and UTX land parcels. Is there a preference as to which one to look at first?
I think the first one, because it gives a clear view of the whole Scrubs.
trying. See how many things I've got on my desktop.
So it gives the clear view of the whole scrubs, and as you can see, it's quite hard to see, but the red bit is saying that's what they will give notice to treat for, which is all that bit there, yes, and then which is the Stamford Brook sewer site, and then the actual GVD, the vesting declaration, is the light blue, which is the UTX site. And the added complication there is there's a pink bit, which is actually the pipe which goes under the ground, and obviously the Ministry of Defence, HS2, will want to have ownership of that pipe, and so they will own the subsoil and the pipe in the ground, but obviously the land above it will be returned to the trust. That makes it clear. So
I'll go to the UTX one in detail so we can see that as well.
Yes, so the pink area is the sub area. It's underground actually. It's where the pipe is, but will remain in the ownership of the Ministry of Transport, and the land above it will remain in the ownership of the trust. And the light, well, the turquoise is the area they wish to CPO, and then will be returned to the trust after the works have been completed, which includes returning the 6 utilities back to the road. And just to amplify on that, the work to actually move the utilities in 2023 will take until April 24, I think I said in the last report. And then we've asked what happens after that. And they said the land will be returned for public use from 24 until 28 before they go back in and move them to the road. So the GVD would remain in place until 2028, until that had happened.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Are people happy for me to put the questions up, or would you like me to leave the maps up for a bit longer? Miriam?
I just wonder whether it makes sense to have a discussion about anything arising from the sort of new information in this document and the maps before we get on to the questions, or we do that after the questions.
I'm very happy to. Have you seen the list of questions, just to make sure we're not duplicating anything?
Yes, I have.
Lovely. In that case, I'm very happy to. Forgive me, Councillor Donovan, I didn't see your hand up as well. Miriam, did you have something specifically to ask about? And then I'll go to Belinda.
I mean, yes, I think, well, firstly, on this issue of it's 2 things about the UTX works. One, why do HS2 now want to move 6 of the utilities back under the road? That seems like that's a sort of new plan. And then from a sort of legal perspective, are there any issues or potential issues with HS2 retaining ownership of the subsoil and then on the previous map, sorry, could we go back to the previous map for a second?
I've lost the other map.
That's okay. So basically on the other map, that it showed the area in red, which was the Stamford Brook sewer site, which would be CPO'd under a notice to treat and a notice to enter, but that bit of red didn't seem to include the little sort of sticking out bit, which is HS2's compound, which they've said they need as a turning circle for the trucks doing the work. So that just seems a bit odd.
Yes. If I can try and answer that, Chair, I think it's because it's about the easements, the access to the area for Thames Water to repair or go into that pipe, into that sewer if they needed to. So the area they need to CPO or notice to treat in this case is the area concerning the easements requirements.
I mean, I have to say, I'm still confused, because my understanding was that for the Stamford Brook sewer site, because HS2 seem to be congenitally incapable of getting their ducks in a row, they have failed to reach an agreement as yet with Thames Water, even though they've known they had to since, I don't know, 2015. And so they need the land for longer than they would have it under the Act in order to carry out the works, but they don't seem to be giving themselves sufficient land to carry out the works. I mean, I guess that's sort of their problem, but it just seems curious. Because they're not keeping it forever to allow Thames Water to do any repairs.
No, but the easement will last in perpetuity for Thames Water.
Right,
but
yes.
Their timetable is to complete this work by April next year on the Stamford Brook sewer site, and then to reinstate by May. That hasn't changed. And, and I'd be very surprised that if they don't complete the easement with Thames Water in time, before the requirement to notice to treat. But I think it's their backstop, and that's okay. Why they put it in.
Yeah, understood. Yeah. So theoretically, just so I'm clear on this, they may not end up issuing a notice to treat or a notice to enter for the Stamford Brook sewer if they reach agreement with Thames Water in time and finish the works.
That's schedule. Correct, and I think it's
got it.
It's October of this year where they need to instigate that notice to treat. So they need to sort out Thames Water by then.
Okay, that's.
Thank you. Miriam, is that all right for now? Can I go to Councillor Donovan? Perfect. Councillor Donovan, I can see your hand is up.
You're muted, Councillor Donovan.
Muted. Belinda, you're still muted. I might just go to Adesua, who's just put her hand up.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Yes, obviously it's devastating that this compulsory purchase is happening, truly devastating. But the word easement actually triggered, obviously people need to be able to walk. And this, this area, it's a legal term for easement, for people actually being able to access all this. And I just wanted to make sure that it's this can't be used to prevent this happening in any way.
That's not the intention. There are easements already on the scrubs for Thames water, because the sewer does come through already, and it'll be really about what we can plant or put over that area of easement, and that's what the easement sort of determines.
Right. Obviously, the easement is also a legal term for access for the people as well. I just wondered whether that could be used, but obviously not, sadly. Okay, thank you.
No. Okay.
Thank you. Adesua, I can see your hand is up.
Thank you, Councillor. I just wanted to just to pick up on the second point which Miriam raised in relation to the legal rights. I think, and correct me if I've got the question wrong, in terms of their ability to acquire the subsoil. Was that what you were asking?
You muted, Miriam. My question was really, are there any risks or sort of potential unintended consequences from them being able to acquire the subsoil?
Okay, we may come to it during the questions, but I'll just briefly summarise how we've got to their ability to actually acquire the subsoil. So in relation to the HS2 Act itself, Section 4 of the Act is what gives the Secretary of State power for HS2 to acquire as much of the land within certain limits as may be required for certain purposes. Now, the area of land that we're talking about in relation to the subsoil is plot 75. So in the Act itself, there are limits as to areas which can be acquired. And plot 75, which is the blue and the turquoise, that is within the limits of the land to be acquired. So in acquiring it, they can acquire the subsoil. They are able to acquire the subsoil. That's something which is permitted under the Act. It falls within the area which is permitted for acquisition under the Act, and it would also fall within the purposes which have to be satisfied before the Act can be acquired. So, as Steve mentioned, there's a specific purpose for which the sewer being placed underneath that, which would fall within the purposes which are permitted. So that's how they are able to acquire under the Act.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adesua. And forgive me, Adesua, would you mind just introducing yourself as well?
Apologies, Councillor. I'm Adesua Omorige. I'm the Assistant Director of Legal Services at the Council.
Thank you.
Apologies.
Stephen.
Yes, I'm interested in the answer to question C, which is the legal guarantee that the land must be returned to, it says LBHF, but I think it means LBHF as trustee of the charitable trust on completion. And the answer is that HS2 have advised they can provide legal binding assurance that the land will be returned as soon as the works have been finished. And this seems to me perhaps the most important answer in the questions and answers, and really important that our legal advisors press them for that document, which we would like, or we, Wormwood Scrubs Charitable Trust, would like as soon as possible, because that would be reassuring in many ways, I think.
I completely agree on that. Stephen, I wonder if it's worth waiting, if you've got any other comments on anything new, and then dealing with that as we go through the questions, because I think for everyone that's probably the most pertinent question to make sure we've got the answer to. Adesua, would you like to come back on that one briefly, or should we wait to go through the questions one by one?
I'm happy to pick up on that now, if that's all right. So yes, you're right. I mean, the ability to acquire the land, whether it was Wormwood Scrubs or any type of acquisition, by its very nature means that they can acquire it for potentially in perpetuity. Now, HS2 have sought to assure the trust representatives in meetings of their certainty of providing, the certainty that it will be provided to the land will be returned after the works have been completed. And as we all know, it's things said verbally aren't necessarily binding. So there is a desire to see what assurance exactly that HS2 are prepared to provide, because simply stating that they will do that would not provide the trust with sufficient assurance. So that's an ongoing matter, which the trust representatives are waiting for confirmation from HS2 as to exactly what assurance, and then we can assess that and then provide some advice to the trust as to whether that's an acceptable guarantee or whether in fact it needs to be something further. So that's something which is ongoing, and which I suspect we would hope to be able to have a further update for you at the next meeting as to those discussions, because we note how important that is in terms of wanting clarification on that.
And Stephen, I can't remember if you were in the community leaders meeting last week with HS2, where the question was asked to them about whether the plan was to return the land and whether there was going to be a promise, and they said it absolutely would be. So obviously that's lovely to hear, but as Adesua says, we do want to make sure that that's an absolute concrete guarantee that we will get the land back as much as we can get one. So I think we will keep that one under review and hope to have a response on that pretty quickly. Miriam, did you have anything else that you wanted to ask before we run through the questions?
No, I think everything else I have can be covered as we run through the questions. Thank you.
Lovely. Okay, I will stop sharing the map and move on to the questions. Give me a second. Okay, can we all see those properly? Good, lovely. Right, what's the best way to go through this? Do you want me to read them out and then Adesua and Steve can jump in with the answers, or kind of flesh out the answers that are there? I'm going to say yes to that. Right, so question A, which back bits of land are HS2 trying to CPO? We've got the two maps. Steve, are those up on the website under the agenda for this meeting, so people can go and review those maps if they want to?
Yes, they're part of the report. Yes, Chair.
Okay. Great. This could be an Adesua or a Steve question. Why are HS2 trying to CPO land when they could just extend the lease for the UTX and SBS sites with LBHF?
Yeah, I think what they're saying is they can't grant the easements in perpetuity unless they own the land, and the CPO gives them that right. Otherwise, they're relying on the council to do those easements, which may or may not conclude anytime soon. So they want to be in the driving seat, I think, so they can stick to their schedule.
Thank you. If anyone's got any comments or questions on any of these, please do pop your hand up or jump in. C, we've already asked this, but I'll ask it again. What is the legal guarantee or basis that the land must be returned to LBHF and Wormwood Charitable Trust upon completion of works? Could they sell it to a developer instead? Adesua and I have had several conversations about that. As she says, we're waiting for a written guarantee from them. Adesua, is there anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I think the only thing to add to it really is just in terms of the, and this goes back to the purposes. So they can acquire the land for particular purposes. If it so happens that during the period of time that the land is being held by them, they are actually using the land for purposes other than those which are permitted, it would be at that point which the trust may wish to take action. There may, I know that it has popped up in possibly two questions of concern about what may happen if they decide to sell it when they're still proposing to use it as land for the HS2 works. But it is something where if they are using the land for permitted purpose, the actions of the trust would be limited. However, if they were to use it for something else, then there would be an opportunity to potentially take action to see for that, because clearly they would have acquired it for one purpose. I suspect that given the sensitivity of this, there might be there will be many eyes on what is happening in the event that they were to use it for another purpose. But yeah, there would be an option in that event.
Thank you. Question, oh, Miriam. Miriam, you're muted.
You would think that would have learned to unmute myself by now. I don't think this is covered specifically elsewhere, but apologies if it is. But what is the nature of the sort of the acquisition or compensation? Will HS2 pay whatever is deemed to be full market value for the land, and then at the point of return, will the trust then have to pay full market value to buy it back, or how does that?
Yes, so the normal position would be that in calculating the value, calculating the purchase price, it would be the market value. So when HS2 come to acquire the land, they will be paying to the trust the market value of the land, and vice versa. When the land is returned, that the council, if it wished to acquire it, the trust, if it wished to acquire it, would be paying the market value. Now, one of the things which HS2 mentioned again in this public meeting, which Steve has referred to, is their intention that actually when the land is returned to the trust, it's not proposed that the council would have to pay, I keep calling it the council, sorry, the trust would have to pay the market value of the land. It's proposed that the land would be returned at no cost. Now that's what they have set out within the public meeting. Again, similar to the legal guarantees, we would want to have assurances of that's actually the intention, and there's no intention to change the position, given that the normal position would be acquisition at both ends at market value.
Thank you.
Thank you. Question D, is there any loophole in the wording of the CPO where HS2 could claim they require the land to enable completion of the station for some new or undisclosed purpose other than the sewer and UTX works? I know there's some concern about this, about the new station design and whether this additional parcel of land would be needed to improve access to the station. Addison, I know you've touched on this already, but do you just want to say something else about HS2 being permitted to use the land for a totally different purpose than the CPO is designed for?
Yes, so the acquisition of the land has to be for a purpose which is permitted under the Act. From the details that have been provided, the areas which they propose to acquire are those which fall within the limits of the Act. So this refers to the 2 plots of land which we saw a few moments ago on the plans, and the purposes for which the land is acquired fall within the purposes under the Act. So if they stick with the original location and the purposes, that would be permitted. Likewise, if the purposes were to change, but were still within the purposes permitted under the Act, and then still within the location, that would still be permitted. I think it would be hard to argue that after acquiring it, a new undisclosed purpose, other than that which is permitted, has suddenly come to light, which they therefore need to use the land for, because I would imagine that in serving the notice on the trust of their intention to either use the notice to treat method or the GVD, they would be setting out what that purpose is and the basis upon which they intend to inquire. So I think we would be, if there was to be a change of purpose, it would be comparing what is currently being used against what they told us at the time that they served the notice of their intention to acquire.
Thank you. And would that be the case even if you could argue that the 2 purposes are tangentially related? So obviously the whole purpose of the CPO is to make sure they've got everything they need to make the station viable. could they therefore say that they wish to now have a different usage for the site, also to make the station viable? Or would
I think it would be difficult to argue that if what they are proposing to do is so different to what is proposed under the Act. I think those would be the grounds upon which you would challenge. But I think that if what they are proposing to do does fall within the purposes, the same purposes which they've identified to us, there would be difficulty trying to challenge that. And I think one of the ways that we would seek to ensure that we're clear is to actually obtain clarity from HS2, a lot of detail about the specific purpose, so that if they do something else, we've got something to hold them to.
Thank you.
Because I think the word purpose is quite widely drafted. So we want to be very clear about exactly what it is they're doing, so that if they did something different, then at least there's no confusion as to whether that was the original intention.
And that's my sort of follow-up. And can we seek that really, really detailed clarity on exactly what it is that they are setting out to do with the land, so that there can be no further reinterpretation of the purpose later on?
Yes, I think there are, and we'll come to them, there are a few things where details have been provided and where they might have been changed that we will want to see clarification over a number of things, firm clarification as to what they're doing. And this would be one of them, in the same way that we'd be looking at the guarantees as well.
Thank you. And could you very briefly just talk through what the process would be if they suddenly did build a ramp to the station on the site, what we would do in that instance?
So if it became very clear that they were doing something which was outside of the purposes, I mean, there are a variety of things that we might want to look at. We first of all want to assess what exactly is happening and what they are doing. I think we would want to give them an opportunity to explain what it is they're doing, and taking a view as to that, as to whether or not that does fall within the purposes. And then legal options might include things like injunctions to prevent them carrying on. I think injunctions are probably the main one, because you would want something that would essentially stop them doing it as soon as possible, and there are various options to obtain an injunction. I think it would depend on exactly what it is they're doing and because it may be that actually in discussions with them there is an acceptance that what they're doing falls outside of it and they stop it of their own volition. But we certainly want to have details as to what is happening, particularly if we're concerned that it goes beyond what is permitted. And on the basis of that information, then decide what next steps are appropriate.
Thank you. I know this is a question that people have got some concerns about, so as I say, please do jump in if needed. Question E, what options exist for LBHF and the Trust? Currently, do we take HS2 to court for judicial review? What do we do in this instance?
Okay, so the Act itself, the ability to acquire the land is included as part of the Act. So prior to the bill, when it was 2014, before the bill became an Act, that was the opportunity really for people to object to the bill becoming an Act. And there were numerous objections raised by various parties. And in addition to objecting to the Act, it was also objecting to the things within the Act, such as the ability to CPO. Now, as we all know, the bill did become an Act. So the ability to be able to object to the principle of the CPO, that has fallen away when the bill became an Act. And we've specifically sought clarity over this, because in a normal CPO, notice is provided and everybody has an opportunity to be able to comment on whether it's acceptable, etc., etc. Now, because it's a little bit unusual with this, in that the provisions were built into the Act itself. So whilst there isn't an ability to object to it, what there is scope for is potentially looking at legal challenge. Now, the legal challenge, you would be looking at the grounds, potential grounds, at the point at which HS2 serve notice on the trust of their intention to acquire, either via GVD or notice to treat. And you would then be looking at the decision process at that point to see whether there are any grounds on which a legal challenge could be made to the decision itself. Now, it's unfortunate because in an ideal world, you'd want to be able to say with certainty as of today, yes, these would be the grounds, but it would be very much dependent upon what the process is that they follow. The intended timescale is October, and looking at whether or not a challenge could be made to that decision. We've looked at what other potential options there might be in terms of preventing the CPO, and the option that seems to be available is the judicial review option in relation to the decision itself and potentially challenging it. And we've also looked at who can make the decision. So we have the situation where the council is corporate trustee of the trust. So there could be standing for the council in its role as corporate trustee, and also whether in fact the council as the local authority could look to bring a legal challenge. And it's a little bit of a tricky one because the land is owned by the council on behalf of the trust. And we've had confirmation that, yes, the council as council, not as corporate trustee, could itself, rather than the trust, bring forward a legal challenge if there are sufficient grounds and if it's successful. So there is that option to consider at the point when the decision comes forward that they wish to proceed.
Thank you. Are there any follow-up questions on that point? Okay, thank you. Thank you. So that first list of questions was forwarded to me by residents and compiled. So I'll move on to the next section of questions which have been forwarded on from the Friends. Question 1, was the notice of intention to use CPO served on LBHF or the trust? And if on LBHF, was it in its capacity as trustee of the trust? The fairlies, I think even I can answer that one, and that notice has not yet been served. It's been communicated to officers that it will be served in October, if and when we finally receive it. And so is there something to add on to that?
Yes, that's as far as we're aware at this stage. They have verbally indicated that it is their intention to do that, but no notice to date has been served.
The next question is for HS2 to respond to. Do you know why it was done by HS2 head office without consultation from their local management? It would be wonderful to be able to understand the inner workings of HS2, but sadly we do not. Has the Ministry of Defence been consulted given their overriding rights over the scrubs? We're not aware they've been consulted. Steve or Addisoo, is there anything to add to that?
No. I don't think so. We haven't spoken to them. I'm not aware that HS2 have spoken to them either.
Thank you. Is LBHF and Trust taking specialist legal advice? Yes, we are. Argued, this was answered earlier in point, are we intending to argue against the use of CPO and make a formal objection? Stephen, I can see your hand's gone straight up.
It was for the last question. Can we encourage them to talk to the Ministry of Defence, because it would be actually bad for us if they sort of thought they were home and dry and suddenly the Ministry of Defence said, hey, wait a minute, because we want them gone as soon as we can get them gone, don't we, whatever the process towards that. So when you are in discussion with them, will you advise them to get clearance from the Ministry of Defence?
Yes, well, I'll certainly take that back, Stephen, and yes, say that to them. Yes.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Stephen. Councillor Donovan?
Oh, yes, I just want to back up what Stephen is saying. Please can we go to the Ministry of Defence about this, because it's so disgraceful, the whole thing, that hopefully they might be able to intervene. You never know.
Thank you. Okay, LVHF intending to argue against the use of the CPO make a formal objection. That was largely asked and answered above. Is there anything else to add to that from any side before we go on to the next question?
No, nothing further from me on that point, Councillor.
Thank you. Belinda, is that a legacy hand or a new hand?
Apologies, I will put it down. Thank you.
Will LVHF share the main conclusions of this advice and tell us how they intend to respond to HS2? I think the second part of that, I think, probably relates to the question above. And the legal advice, I think, is privileged. Adesua, is there anything to add to that?
Yes, so the legal advice will be privileged, but there will be details provided of next steps and actions taken, and the trust members will be kept updated by Steve as trust manager.
Thank you. Another set of questions. Some of these do overlap. In respect to the prospective CPAs for both the UTX area and the sewer diversion land, does HS2 give any reason for intending to use CPO? I think that's been asked and answered above. Does HS2 confirm that they've explored and exhausted all other alternatives to retain the land for their works? Adesua, I don't know if there's much more to add there.
No, there isn't. The only thing I would say to that is they've obviously provided details to officers at various meetings. Under the Act, there is no requirement before they exercise the powers for them to demonstrate that they've exhausted all of the other options. Just wanted to include that reference. It's unfortunate because you'd almost hope that that was a provision before they went down the route, but the Act doesn't require them to do that before they exercise the powers. They just need to make sure they exercise the powers before the end of the timescale.
That said, and Steve, I don't know if you want to come in on this. I know officers have been working incredibly hard to try and lobby HS2 in every way they possibly can.
I think that the answers here and the answers to the lettered questions really cover it. Thank you, as best we can. It's not totally satisfactory, but I acknowledge that can't do better.
Does HS2 give a timetable for issuing formal CPO notices and a timeline generally? So we know the October date is when they're intending to serve notice. Have HS2 specified exactly which portions of land are included within their CPO? We've got those two maps which are appended and are available online. Does HS2 state specifically for how long they intend to retain the land and for their works? As we say, yes, the sewer works are due to be completed by 2022, UTX works due to be completed by April 2024. Adesua or Steve, do you want to comment on that?
So they have said that they will retain the UTX until 28-29, until the utilities are returned to the road, and between 24 and 29 or 28, the land will be returned for public use, and then they'll go back in again. And they said conflicting messages really. They've said that they will return the Stamford Brook sewer site as soon as the work's complete, but they've also said they'll return the land altogether. So we're seeking clarification on that, but I believe in the public meeting they said they would return the land as soon as the work was complete. So I think there's potentially a difference between the Stamford Brook sewer site and the UTX site.
That was definitely how it sounded in the meeting, that they would be looking sites slightly differently. Asked and answered already, but does HS2 give legally binding commitments to return the land promptly after completing their works? Most important concerning issue. Are LBHF satisfied that such commitments cannot be changed by HS2? So, as previously discussed, we are waiting for the legally binding assurances that the land will be returned, and we hope to have those as soon as possible. Does a CPO alter HS2's obligation to undertake or pay for restitution of the land for the condition in which they originally occupied it? It sounds like yes, they will continue to apply after completion of works. One of the questions I've raised here about this is obviously there might be some interim damage to sites. I'm just thinking about the trucks driving off matting on grass last year. So just clarifying what happens to that sort of interim damage in between. Miriam, I can see your hand is up.
Yes, it was just in reference to the point about when the land is returned, and that is another area where officers are kind of continuing to seek clarification, because if there are two different notices or sort of formats of CPO, there's no reason why, sorry, the dog has just turned the television on, that they should have the same timeline. But as I said, it's another point where ongoing sort of scrutiny and clarification is required.
Yeah, through the chair, yes, we are pushing for that, to get that clarification, and so we're expecting the Stamford Brook sewer site to be returned to us from May next year, if at all they actually do acquire it, if they get Thames Water sorted.
Thank you. Okay. Will the prospect of the CPO mean that the ecological master plan needs to be delayed or amended to exclude portions of the land under CPO? Steve, you can come in on this if you want to. I think the short answer is yes on the sites that will have works on, or the UTX site whilst work is being carried out.
Yes, I don't think there'd be any point in doing works on that site until they've finally gone back in and removed the utilities back to the road.
Question 9, if the land is to be subject to compulsory purchase, at what rate would the land be valued? At market rate, which is independently assessed. Stephen Addison, do we know who does the independent assessing?
I believe it's in the report further up.
Give me.
Sue, do you know what the wording was? But there was reference to it.
It would normally be if it couldn't be agreed between the parties, in terms of each party obtaining their own valuation, you'd have somebody independent to agree between the parties what the valuation should be. So HS2 would normally propose, the council would take its own advice as to what the valuation would be, and if it couldn't be agreed, then a third party gets involved.
Thank you. Question 10, would LBHF be required to buy back the land from HS2? If so, would the sale price be subject to increase? At that meeting on the 26th, Lee Holmes did say that the land will be transferred back to the trust at no cost. So we are just trying to confirm this from them and make sure we've got something written down that does state that this is the case. Again, Steve, yeah. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that.
I wasn't at the meeting, but they have confirmed he did say that to me, and it's whether did he mean at no cost or no net cost. If the land value increased between the two sales, did he mean that that there will be no cost to the council or the trust rather in terms of buying it back? So I've asked for that clarification, but I haven't had anything in writing as yet.
That's good. I mean, he definitely said at no cost. He didn't slip in the net. So holding corner. Stephen.
Yes, I think it's an important issue for officers to get sorted in the discussions, because the last thing we want is for there to be a nice low valuation all agreed by everyone when they acquire it, and then for whatever reason, perhaps because they built a station next to it, it's worth a whole lot more at the end. And so I think it's really worth pressing them to agree to this, again, in unchangeable format, if you can. Thank you.
And then question 11, if answers to 9 and 10 are yes, i.e. what rate would the land be valued at market rate, and then would we have to buy land back at the rate? Could a possible scenario arise in which LBHF does not have the funds available to buy back the land? And could the areas under CPO then be sold to developers or retained by HS2 for development? I mean, fortunately, with question 10, it may be that we get the land back at no cost. But I assume that even in this absolute worst case scenario, which I can't see arising, because presumably we just set the money aside to be able to buy back the land, even if that happened, the land has been CPO'd for very specific purposes and then couldn't be sold on to developers.
Yes, so yes, so the land being CPO'd by HS2 for particular purposes. So in theory, the land could be retained by them indefinitely. HS2 have assured us, and as I mentioned earlier, we haven't yet got the legally binding assurance, but assuming we get the legally binding assurance in place, we would want it to cover not only the fact that it would be returned to the council, but that also they would be restrained from selling the land elsewhere, which we would want to have certainty over. And yes, you're right. In a situation where the council, I keep calling it the trust, is going to acquire it, and we do get some certainty back as to what the nature of the no cost actually means. I would have thought there would be funds set aside to make sure that if in fact it's as Steve has understood it, maybe that we would be able to acquire it, as opposed to allowing it to potentially be acquired elsewhere.
Thank you. Brilliant. Okay, well, that's all the questions I've got on here. Does anyone else in the meeting have other questions that they'd like to ask? Or any other points I'd like to raise? Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Councillor, could I just wanted to clarify, just so that it's clear in terms of the specific updates. I mean, there'll be many updates, but in terms of the priorities, I've written down here clarity over when the land will return, clarity over the purposes for which the land will be used, and clarity over the terms under which the land will return. So whether in fact it is, as appeared to be the case at the meeting of the 26th of July, or whether in fact it was something else. So those two as being the main priorities. I just wanted to check whether that covered the three points, or was there anything else that any of the other councillors wanted to mention that I've missed out, just so that we're clear going forward? Or does that cover the three main points?
I think it's a good summary, if I may say so, Chair.
No, I agree. I think that's
Thank you.
on.
Thank you, Councillor.
All right. Thank you. Steve, the microphone suddenly lit up on you. I don't know if that's because you were trying to speak and I just talked over you.
No, Chair. Nothing further to add. Thank you.
Fine. All right, thank you. In that case, I don't think, I'm sorry, I've been flipping around so much, I've now lost the agenda. Is there anything else that's on the agenda, or is that now the end of the meeting? Lovely. Okay. Well, in that case, I will bring this meeting to a close. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time. We've obviously got the next meeting in about a month in September, where I think we'll probably be able to provide hopefully a bit of an update on things. In the meantime, please do email over any questions that you might have. But otherwise, if there's nothing else, thank you very much everyone for your time this evening.